the clock is ticking on our time here, and we haven't talked about CLOC yet. Zach, you want to kick it off? I know you wrote about them this week, or you maybe you
I
didn't write
could
about them.
I could not possibly follow with a better segue than that, so I'll just jump into it. No, I mean, CLOC was this week. We talked a little bit about it last week, how, especially for some people, it seemed to spring up kind of out of nowhere. I think that's partially the function of it being fully virtual, like so many other conferences. But there's just a lot happening around CLOC right now. We also talked last week a little bit about Mary O'Carroll, legal ops at Google previously, who's now going to Ironclad, left her post at CLOC at the same time. Mike Haven is the new president of CLOC, and we talked with him this week, just kind of plans for the future of the organization and what he foresees as CLOC's place in the ecosystem moving forward. Very similar to the trajectory that CLOC was on previously, he's very into bringing outside voices into the legal ops sphere. So that means more legal technology companies, more alternative legal service providers, more law firms coming in and having an actual seat at the table. I think his quote to us is something along the lines of, we're not looking to necessarily completely open up our board yet, but it's something that's on the table. So especially for a very influential legal ops organization like that, I think it's very interesting that being the direction they're moving forward, because I think CLOC grew kind of as this place for legal ops professionals specifically to come, talk, interact in a way that hadn't really existed before, because legal ops is so nascent. But as legal ops has continued to grow, bringing in those new voices, I think they see as a necessity as much as anything else, just because legal ops as a discipline has gotten such a large voice these days. So in order to continue being part of the conversation, that's kind of what they feel they need to do. And I think we also reported a bunch from CLOC's programming this week, and I think you kind of saw that reflected there. There's a lot of conversation about, okay, so where do we move from here, basically, now that now that legal ops has arrived. So, I mean, I'm guessing they're planning on going back in person next year. Wouldn't surprise me. Most people are. And especially when we get that first in-person CLOC again, it'll be interesting to see, honestly, the makeup of who's there as much as anything else. Whether it's going to be more law firms, more legal service providers, in addition to continuing to grow the legal ops sphere.
So I'll throw in my little update on Buserius Legal Tech Essentials, partly because Stephanie Corey, who was one of the founders of CLOC, was one of the speakers for the series. It's an intense 16 session, 90-minute a session series through May, sponsored by the law school and hosted by Dan Katz, who's at UIC Kent, Chicago, and Dirk Hartung in Hamburg. And it's really well done and well moderated. But the thing that the thing I wanted to relate to legal ops is that most of this is geared towards legal ops. There's a huge global lawyer audience, but many of the people are non-legal professionals who are interested in this space, who are in technology, working in access to justice, opening up courts, different aspects of law. And there's all this discussion in the threads about certifications in legal ops, which don't really exist except in maybe LLM programs or advanced programs at law schools that cost an enormous amount of money, that don't make sense in the pay model currently for legal ops in the not maybe higher level firms, but kind of some lower level or smaller firms, smaller companies. So I just thought that was interesting. And one of the things that Stephanie said is that she wished that CLOC had taken the lead on developing certifications for legal ops. And that so I kind of wondered, it seemed like that's a regular debate. And I'm curious kind of if you feel that way too, Zach, like that there's some tension there about, clearly they're starting to open it up, but maybe, how far they open it up and what certification means, and whether that competes with others in the space that creates some tension.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I know when Connie Brenton was still at CLOC, I had the conversation with her kind of along those lines, and she said, well, I mean, between the combination of JDs and MBAs, I think that kind of covers it. Like those different skill sets kind of combined in one. And as long as you can bring both business and law in the same place, then I think you're good. I obviously, a lot of people kind of to your point disagree with that and would like to see the specific certification. I think the question for me is what that would entail, just because the current legal ops is at the intersection of so many different things in trying to talk to the GC, trying to talk to the IT department, trying to talk to procurement. How exactly you and kind of the legal ops in many organizations is at a different maturity as well, where some are really empowered to actually make these decisions. Others are just kind of managing decisions that have already been made. So since there's not really that defined what is legal ops in every organization, I think it would be very tough to try and put something like that together.
Yeah, and even in this series, they highlighted that issue by having a panel of legal ops heads at 3 extremely different companies. And, and it really comes down to the nature of legal, especially in a corporate legal department, the nature of the legal services and what legal does for that company. So that to your point, I think that makes it even more complicated, but there are some really common threads and themes for legal ops teams.
What's the argument for certification? I'm not sure I even get it. Why is it important?
It goes beyond, it would lay foundational skills on legal technologies and technology in business. So it's that multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary approach. So you wouldn't have to be a lawyer. But it's more advanced than a project manager.
I think it kind of would help. It would help in terms of as an area matures, and when you're looking at hiring and all of this kind of stuff, and if you're looking at mobility and all, I don't know, just as the market matures, I think typically that you do end up having recognized standards, don't you? It makes it easier for people to move. It makes it easier for you to understand what someone's experience is and benchmark it, I think. I take your point completely that it's a tough one though.
Well, I was just going to say that, I mean, you have to be careful about making everything technology based. So my degree is computer science, mathematics. Started out, my first job out of college was complex litigation support with Rust Consulting before the world called it e-discovery. And I was very technical. I could IPL the Wang VS and manage the systems and everything else. Today, my job is actually a fraction that actually deals with the technology. It's implementation, it's change management. So I don't know that, I mean, we used to joke about magic PCs, right? When the world first was moving to PC and PC networks, PCs were going to do all these magical things, and of course they didn't. But I mean, that's, to me, smacks of the magic technology piece. It's people, it's process, it's technology. It's in that order for a reason. And I would be concerned that, a technology certification really wouldn't provide ultimately what you're looking to have in an individual. What I think is interesting in all of this is who's going to get the holy grail of membership, corporate, private law firm, vendor, to use the biggest of the triangles. I know it's really kind of a hexagon at this point with all the little pieces, but I mean, to me, that's the group that's going to go forward. There will always be, I think, something for individuals, the lawyers over here, the law firms over here, the corporate law over here, the vendors over here. But the very first, I guess you could call it a plug, the very first alt conference was amazing in that sitting down at the table for the conversation, at least for the first time that I ever experienced in 30 plus years, was all 3 of those players around the same table having that conversation. So it's a function of law firm, this is what we think we want to offer. Corporate law, we don't want anything to do with that. Vendor, you guys are nuts because you can't build or design that in a way that's going to work anyway. That's the holy grail. And if CLOC is going to be the one that's going to be able to reach it by bringing everybody in, kudos to them. But everybody's looking for it, and it's been as evasive as the Holy Grail has been.
Yeah.
Sorry, Zach.
Oh, I was just going to say there was a question in the chat that kind of gets to that too, which was ACC or CLOC, essentially, which is going to be the most innovative moving forward. But kind of to your point, Jeff, I think ultimately they might be serving two different audiences, because ACC would be the ones that are specifically looking for that legal ops networking to make it super corporate legal department specific. And more than anything else, be able to interface with GCs and kind of that back and forth. But if you're looking for the entire ecosystem where legal ops fits in with their outside law firms, with their legal technology providers, then that's CLOC's probably what you're looking for there.
But it's going to be so fascinating with Mike as to, because obviously they've wrestled with this for such a long time. Like, they didn't want to let law firms into properly in, because they didn't want to dilute, because obviously they used their CLOC was primarily, as we all know, like a kind of training, networking environment, and they didn't want to dilute that by effectively letting the seller in, which is a law firm. So I've spoken to them a few times about this, and obviously then they transitioned to, right, we're going to let law firms in, but actually they weren't really, they were kind of let in, but not really. They were, if you actually looked at what was going on underneath, they were kind of, well, yeah, you can come and be part of the partnership, but they weren't allowed us in the networking groups and like properly into. I think that you see this softening, they have this potential to bring everybody in, and it sounds like Mike's going very much in that direction, which I think is what everyone's craving. But it'd be really interesting to see how they protect, because one of the things that people love is this environment where they can learn and network without those other influences in. So it'd be really, I'm fascinated to see how far they take it.
Yeah.